All right, so let's start with the big story that we are tracking on WION at this hour. France has got its president for the next 5 years, and it is the centrist Emmanuel Macron who has emerged again for the second time running as the president of the French Republic. And this has happened for the first time in almost about 20 years. The 44-year-old incumbent president came to power in Paris as the youngest president of the French Republic in 2017. And this time round too, he has managed to comfortably defeat the far-right rival Marine Le Pen.
Et je sais que pour nombre de nos compatriotes.
Now, according to the results from the French Interior Ministry for the second and the final round of the polls, Emmanuel Macron managed to win as many as about 58.5% of the vote, while Marine Le Pen of the Nationalist and the far-right National Party scored about 41.6% of the votes in comparison. Now, the margin represents a smaller gap between the two candidates. Macron had won about 66.1% of the vote back then, and the president's re-election victory, however, has been marred by the lowest voter turnout in over 50 years. What is interesting to note is that almost about 28% of the voters decided to abstain during the second phase of the polling in the elections. In his victory speech, Emmanuel Macron acknowledged that many had only voted for him because they wanted to keep Marine Le Pen out. In a speech in central Paris at the foot of the Eiffel Tower, Emmanuel Macron has vowed to respond to the anger of the voters who backed his far-right rival. He's also acknowledged the dissatisfaction with his first term and has said that his new term will not continue unchanged from the last 5 years. Emmanuel Macron has vowed a new method that is expected to be less top-down.
Sa force dans tous les domaines. Et nous le ferons.
All right, now to give more insights in terms of what this victory, of course, means for Emmanuel Macron and indeed for the French Republic, we're joined in by our correspondent Rosie Burchett, who's joining us live from Paris and has been tracking the story very, very closely for us. Rosie, this of course is a crucial victory for Emmanuel Macron. He's managed to come back again as the president. So what can we expect to happen in France? Is this going to be more of the same, or is there some change that we can expect in terms of how Emmanuel Macron will go about doing his business?
You're right. The results are in. Emmanuel Macron is keeping the keys to the Élysée Palace. He has won against far-right challenger Marine Le Pen an historic victory. As you rightly mentioned, the first French president in 2 decades to secure re-election for a second term. However, not all of those voting for him to keep him in power voted because they want to show endorsement of his policies and of his track record for the last 5 years. I was out under the shadow of the Eiffel Tower last night here in Paris as Macron's supporters celebrated his victory. They were jubilant and they say he deserves to have been re-elected. That is not, however, the whole story. Many people feel, and many people I've spoken to here in Paris feel, that they had to choose between the lesser of two evils and only gave their vote to Emmanuel Macron to block out far-right challenger Marine Le Pen. Now, in terms of what comes next, we have legislative elections coming up in France in the next couple of weeks, where we shall see how well Emmanuel Macron's party, La République En Marche, or the Republic on the Move, manages to fare when it comes to getting seats within that legislative house. And of course, without a clear majority, or at least enough seats to secure a workable coalition, Emmanuel Macron will not be able to advance his policy goals. He said he feels a responsibility toward those both who voted for Marine Le Pen and those who voted for him only to keep Marine Le Pen out of office. And therefore, he'll be looking to try and diversify moving forward in terms of his policy priorities. One thing we know he'll be focusing on is the climate crisis and tackling that, not least because many of those voters who perhaps felt they didn't have a good choice in this election had in the first round supported leftist candidate Jean-Luc Mélenchon or the Green Party and are looking for more action to tackle the climate crisis from their president. Beyond that, Emmanuel Macron also has some big policy challenges he wants to tackle and reform. France's labyrinthine pension system, which will be no easy task, and as I said, we'll see a temperature check when the legislative elections come in a few weeks' time of just how well Emmanuel Macron's party is being received.
Absolutely needed. It's not just administrative challenges that Emmanuel Macron is faced with, because he, as he acknowledged in his victory speech at the foot of the Eiffel Tower yesterday, the nation is deeply divided ideologically because the far right managed to put up a much stronger fight than what anyone had expected. And this is, of course, going to be a huge challenge for Emmanuel Macron to unite a nation that has been so sharply divided in terms of ideology.
I think you've identified his biggest challenge, which is to unite a very polarised nation. Marine Le Pen, his challenger, in her concession speech was rather upbeat and not disappointed at all, it seems, because she pointed to what she calls a victory, which was that she increased her share of the vote significantly versus 2017, when she also tried her hand at getting into the Élysée Palace and becoming French president. So with that vote share increasing, we've seen that in fact that support for the far right here in France has increased to never before seen levels, and Emmanuel Macron does have a big challenge on his hands there. He says that the discord and the disappointment that has led people to choose the far right cannot go unanswered, and that he understands that some people in France feel they may have been left behind. So certainly a rise in support for the far right here in France, with Marine Le Pen increasing her vote share versus 2017, the last time she tried to become president of France.
Absolutely indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Rosie Burchett, for joining us and getting us all those updates from France. We'll of course come back to you as more details emerge in the story. But now we are also joined in by independent journalist Marion Ettinger, who's joining us live from Paris. Now, Mr. Ettinger, this of course is a very crucial moment for Emmanuel Macron. He's managed to come back as the president at the Élysée Palace. But this time round, there is going to be no honeymoon period for the president. He'll have to start delivering with the word go. What do you make of this?
Yeah, like you mentioned, he's the first president who's been re-elected in about 20 years. And traditionally, the French people give a large legislative majority to that president. And that's what happened in 2017. But it doesn't look like that's really going to be the case. There are these big competing blocs in French politics. There's, of course, the bloc that voted for Marine Le Pen, though they've struggled in the past to translate their success in the presidential elections into, seats in the National Assembly. And there's the bloc represented by Jean-Luc Mélenchon, and they won, about 22% of the vote in the presidential election. And there's talks right now among a lot of these parties on the left, including the Greens, the Socialist Party, which had a historic low score this year of 1.7%. Just in 2012, they were governing the country. And the Communist Party in France. And taken together, these parties represent about 30% of the electorate. So right now, Mélenchon has launched a strategy of asking the French people to elect him prime minister, to give him a majority in the parliament, or at least a plurality. So, as you mentioned, there's going to be
the issue of Jean-Luc Mélenchon and how he intends to be the prime minister of France in just a bit. But I want you to dwell a bit upon the rise of the right wing, the far right wing politics in France. Because more than ever in the past, it looks like in this election, with the success of Marine Le Pen, although she came in second, the fact is she was not disappointed. She was pretty upbeat, and she said that this is just the beginning of far-right politics in France, and also the rise of Eric Zemmour in the last few months. This is something that should be very concerning for the French public.
There's been a continual progression. In 2002, her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, made the second round of the election. It was a shock, and he got about 5.5 million votes. Then in the last election, 2017, Marine Le Pen got 10.6 million. This time, she's got over 13 million. So as you say, even though there's been a defeat, it's a continual march. And in certain regions, like I was down in a region known as PACA, P-A-C-A, which includes Provence, Alpes, Côte d'Azur, Marine Le Pen came in first place in that region. Most of the regions, most of the towns in that region are governed by the far right. Outside of the big cities, in a lot of the rural areas of France, the far right is at the head of the game.
Right.
And there doesn't seem to be any, aside from a few places where there's been sort of a left-wing rebound, there's a far left-wing rebound, there's not much alternative to that.
Mr. Ettinger, the question that I want to ask you is, what is it about the far-right politics in France that has made it so acceptable to the people within the French Republic? Because what we saw during the campaigning was a very polarized campaign. I mean, it beggars belief for people who are looking at this campaign that played out from outside of France that the issue like hijab the Islamic headscarf was one of the most prominently discussed issues in the French Republic, where the Muslim population is just about 5%. Women is 2.5%, and that a small fraction wear the hijab.
It goes back to this, French idea, which is a double-edged sword of assimilation. I think in France, anyone can become French, allegedly, but that means leaving behind everything that you had before. Eric Zemmour is a great example of this. Eric Zemmour his family was born in North Africa. He's actually the child of a Berber Jewish immigrants. And yet he has chosen this path of assimilation and extreme assimilation, which means leaving everything behind. So I think the veil is sort of a visible example of that, a visible example of difference that a lot of French people don't like. Or not too many, but a significant block.
All right, interesting. Now, lastly, I want to ask you about what Jean-Luc Mélenchon said, that he has said, forget the presidency, I can run the country by being the prime minister. So when the parliamentary elections will be held in France later in the month of June this year, he is gunning for the prime minister's office. How significant do you think are his chances, considering that he managed to get 22% of the French electorate behind him?
It is possible he could get a plurality of the votes if these negotiations on the left go through. It all depends on, how well organized the other parties are. Right now on the right, on the far right, Eric Zemmour and Marine Le Pen are trying to find an alliance, and they could represent a similar amount of votes. And of course, Macron, who would probably have a reduced majority from the last time, still has a significant block. And a lot of the Socialist Party, who started coming to his side in 2017, have now the gates have opened. There's a reason the Socialist Party did so poorly. A lot of it has been absorbed into Macron, and a lot of Les Républicains, the traditional center-right party, which also got less than 5% of the vote this time around, have joined his coalition.
All right, very interesting days ahead in French politics. A deeply divided electorate is what we are looking at, and how Emmanuel Macron, of course, manages to steer things ahead from here will be a big question. Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Marion, for joining us from Paris and getting us all those insights there. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.